Good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the annual Financial Literacy Lecture Series hosted by the Department of Finance and Economics in the Gary W. Rollins College of Business at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. I am Bento Lobo, and I'm the head of the Department of Finance and Economics at UTC. April is Financial Literacy Month. Financial literacy leads to financial wellness. Financial well-being comes from the ability to absorb financial shocks and control day-to-day and month-to-month finances. It comes from being able to meet your financial goals and have the financial freedom to make the choices that allow you to enjoy life. Financial literacy starts with public awareness. Today's lecture will shine a spotlight on the need for financial literacy in America and elsewhere in the world. At UTC, we offer a minor in personal finance to enable students of any major to study best practices of financial decision-making, from handling student loans and mortgages to planning for retirement and everything in between. Beginning with the fall 2023 semester, personal finance was introduced into the general education curriculum at UTC. We are excited to offer this course to anyone who walks in the door at UTC. For today's lecture, here are a few housekeeping notes. I urge all participants to submit questions and comments in the Zoom chat. Students, please enter your name and UTC ID in the chat. Before introducing our distinguished speaker, I would like to introduce the Treasurer for the state of Tennessee, Mr. David Lillard. David Lillard has served as Tennessee State Treasurer since January 2009. Under his leadership, he has worked to improve the financial standing of the state and the financial quality of life for Tennessee citizens. His achievements include restructuring the state pension fund to an adjustable hybrid plan, one of the most innovative reforms in the nation, to provide a cost-effective, sufficient, and sustainable retirement benefit. Further innovations established during his tenure include the Tennessee Stars College Savings 529 program and the Tennessee Financial Literacy Commission. Under Mr. Lillard's leadership, Tennessee became the second state in the nation to offer an Achieving a Better Life Experience program when Able Tennessee was launched in June 2016. Able Tennessee is a savings program designed to help individuals with physical and/or mental disabilities to put aside money with tax-free earnings to pay for qualified expenses. Treasurer Lillard is an attorney who earned a Juris Doctor degree at the University of Memphis and a Master of Laws in Taxation from the University of Florida. Please welcome Treasurer Lillard.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lobo, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and Dr. Hensley and others today and be part of your really exceptional program that you're doing here at University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. As you indicated, the Department of Treasury works to benefit citizens by investing in the well-being of Tennesseans through exceptional financial leadership, management, service, and education. It's a multi-emphasis area, and we work to enhance Tennessee's financial resources through investments in financial management generally. Many of our programs support the experience of students at University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and elsewhere. Our in-house investments division directly manages or oversees more than 120 billion, that's billion with a B, on any given day, and it's a constant balance that we're either overseeing or managing. Over the last 10 years, we have earned the state over $45 billion through investment returns. Most of the money we manage helps to fund initiatives that you've already mentioned, such as the Tennessee Promise Scholarship Program, the Chairs of Excellence program that funds faculty positions at Tennessee's public universities, our program of Retire Ready, that is the retirement program for about 380,000 active and retired K through 12 public school teachers and higher education employees, including professors and staff at the UTC campus. Retire Ready combines the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System, a defined benefit plan with the state's deferred compensation plans. The program takes pride in offering one of the top funded public pensions in the country and quality investment options for those deferred compensation accounts, along with comprehensive financial education and retirement counseling, which is available to all members. Additionally, Treasury works to protect the financial integrity of all state-owned assets and maintains a safe environment for state and higher education employees and the general public in all state facilities through the Division of Claims and Risk Management in Treasury. The UTC campus is part of the $33 billion in property that the state self-insures. And if there is property damage on campus or automobile claims, et cetera, then those claims would be handled by the Treasury Department. Of all the initiatives that I lead, I want to say that one of the closest to my heart is working to break the cycles of poverty through financial education. I have the honor of being the chairman of the Tennessee Financial Literacy Commission. The commission was created in 2010 to endeavor to improve and promote financial literacy of Tennesseans through educational programs, publications, and campaigns. We are acutely focused on connecting schools and families with high-quality financial education resources, and these tools are provided by the commission or offered for free to K-12 educators and schools, thanks to the General Assembly and key private donors, financial supporters. I believe in providing financial education and resources is the key to putting Tennesseans on the path to a sound financial future. I know everyone who participates in this program today is concerned with their long-term future financial well-being, or you wouldn't be here today. Your presence tells me that you're committed to improving your lives and those of others through financial wellness. And I'm grateful to you, Doctor, and your staff for what you do in that regard. I'm also grateful to the UTC Department of Finance and Economics for bringing these concepts to both students and the community. And I'm also excited to hear that Dr. Hensley has done great work at the National Endowment for Financial Education. Look forward to the discussion about that today. The need for financial wellness and education in our communities throughout Tennessee is so vast that all leaders, government, business, and higher education from whatever discipline must provide diverse resources that families can access to improve their financial futures. And for those things, we thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer Lillard. We appreciate your time this morning, and I hope you will stay with us for the rest of the lecture. At this point, I would like to introduce our distinguished speaker for this afternoon. Our distinguished speaker is Dr. Billy Hensley, President and CEO of the National Endowment for Financial Education, also called NEFE. It is a private foundation renowned for its visionary approach to redefining financial education. Under Dr. Hensley's leadership, NEFE's influence on the national discourse of effective and inclusive financial education is evident through receiving numerous social honors and awards. Throughout his tenure, he has expanded research, fostered engagement, and advocated for universal K-12 financial education access. He serves on numerous boards, including the Jumpstart Coalition for Personal Financial Literacy, the CNBC Financial Wellness Advisory Council, Union College, and the editorial board of the Journal of Financial Counseling and Planning. Dr. Hensley holds a PhD from the University of Cincinnati and master's and bachelor's degrees from Union College. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Billy Hensley.
Good afternoon. Thank you, excuse me, for that very kind introduction. It's so gratifying to see people at the very top of government leadership, like the treasurer here, bringing this topic to the forefront. It is something that touches and permeates the lives of every citizen. It's something we all have to interact with, personal finances, commerce, to live any kind of financial life at all. And to bring the importance of this topic, the agency that it brings, and to be educated, and the confidence and the power that comes with that is very important. And I commend the treasurer on that and making the time for this today. So let me adjust my settings here to make sure that I am in the right presentation mode. Let's see, one more click here, and I think we're good. I hate that I'm not in my office today because I tend to feel a little more prepared, but it's just been one of those couple of crazy weeks. I also apologize for my raspiness. For those of you who suffer from the spring bloom, you can commiserate with me. And so I've been dealing with that for a couple of weeks. So if you'll pardon my frequent throat clearing, do apologize for that. I just am so thrilled to be here today. I enjoy giving talks like this. And when I started at NEFE, I spent 8 years working in research and doing direct sort of research projects, funding research, really with the goal of trying to bring more depth and quality to the research agenda of financial education and personal finance. And I got to do a lot of talks like this. And now that I'm in a different seat, I don't get to do it as often, and I enjoy it very much. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do something that I enjoy and share with you. So I need to make sure my clock is where I can see it, because I do drone on like we do, you know, but I want to make sure I stay within the time allotted here. So I really wanted to talk about the impactful trends in financial education. And in order to do that, I want to go back just a hair to talk about how we got to this place. And I've been at NEFE for almost 14 years. And when I arrived, I came from educational research, and in particular, college access, economic mobility, career pathway work, and working at a foundation in Ohio, and then my graduate work at the University of Cincinnati. And there were so many parallels to sort of the direct relationship of what's happening or what was beginning to happen in research on financial literacy and financial education. But one of the things that I felt was really missing was a really thorough understanding of the components of how we sort of make sense of the data, make sense of the research. And in particular, the irony that the word financial education, you know, permeated the discussion in the industry, but we didn't spend very much time understanding the depths of educational research and what does that mean for financial education. We were really spending a lot of time in that era focused on sort of optimizing decision making, sort of the economics principles of personal finance. And we felt at NEFE that it was time to build a more robust understanding of human learning and development, curriculum and instruction, and the power of what we know about education and educational research and what that can do to improve financial education, which then increases things like financial literacy, for example. And so that's the framework that we came from when we started looking at this research. But for those of you who don't know NEFE, I wanted to give you just a quick slide here about who we are. We are an operating foundation. We're headquartered in Denver, Colorado, but we are a national organization. We spend our time on a lot of planes and attending a lot of meetings, but you know, we are focused on being champions of effective financial education. And for many years, anyone who sort of put the words fin ed in their work sort of counted as financial educators. And we said, not so fast. You know, there has to be this level of understanding of quality. So we spent many years looking at populations, different demographics of who was getting financial education, who it was working for, who it wasn't, what could we do at the end of career, what could we do at the beginning of learning, all along this entire expansiveness of how do you build financial literacy, which turns into financial confidence, which turns into people who are engaging in the topic. And how do you create that? And so we really were focused for many years on partnership work, on awareness work, and we've started to go much deeper in terms of quality. And some of you may have known who we were when we were providing actually educational materials and curriculum. And we have felt that the best use of our resources as a foundation, as an endowment, is to inform research and inform advocacy so that that touches everyone who is doing this work, not just those who chose to use our materials. And so we tried to elevate our work in a way that we hope strengthens the work that everyone does in the industry. And so what we want at the end, when our mission is fulfilled and when the missions of our peer organizations are fulfilled, we want to see a country in a world really, where people not only have the knowledge and confidence to live their best financial life, but also the opportunity for that. You can know these things and not have the opportunity to apply them. And what we want is for all of those things to work well. And so the way we do that is through philanthropic work, it's through research, it's through advocacy, it's about awareness and technical assistance. And so, more of that information you can find on our website. But I wanted to start with this sort of broader concept of the demand for personal finance. And we've seen really unprecedented interest in K-12 in particular, and in higher ed as well, personal finance instruction. We did a survey a year or so ago of a national represented survey and asked U.S. adults, should high school students be required to take a full semester? We were very specific, a full semester or more of financial education. 88% of the US said yes. And we further asked, did you wish you had been required to take a semester or year-long course on personal finance during high school? And these two numbers are very powerful for a lot of reasons. The first one is you can't get 88% of Americans to agree on much of anything. But this is something that permeates political party, it permeates income level, it permeates education level. Geography, this number holds. And I'll get into a little more about that in a moment. But this 80% number is powerful as well, because what this says to me is that people have had multiple experiences in their life where having more information, more knowledge, more confidence to tackle the financial decisions that are in their life, they know that that information, that coursework or that experience would have served them well. And so when you have people whose life experience is the same as to you, as well as saying that, even more people should be taking it than even the people who wish they had taken it, because their financial lives are more complicated, products are more complicated. There are billions and billions of dollars being spent every day trying to get our attention on what we should spend money on. And so, this is a near universal expectation of American citizens that this topic should be covered and it should be required for a basic fundamental exercise of your life. And when you look at this 88%, we wanted to know, well, who are the 12% who don't think this is a good idea? We dug deeper, and that 12% is largely comprised, not entirely, but largely comprised of lower income citizens, people of color, people who maybe didn't get the opportunity or the chance to go on to college. And what we found was we did, one of our visiting scholars did some focus groups with people who represented that number, that 12%. And when we spent time looking at those data, and when the visiting scholar asked things like, well, what if financial education actually covered things like, they actually told you about how banks make certain decisions and how credit works and how sometimes the system actually is really not very fairly designed. And when you look at products that actually rank your purchasing decisions within an order that maybe will increase the likelihood that you will overdraw. You know, if financial education included a more sort of thoughtful suite of topics like that, would you then think this should be something that's required for you? We said, well, why do you not think this is a good idea? A lot of students felt, and learners in particular, younger people, felt shamed by FinEd, felt sort of, you know, the finger pointed like, hey, you've got student loans and you made a bad decision. Instead of talking about, hey, you have student debt. How do we navigate that? How do you navigate that early in your career? How do you navigate that mid-career? What decisions can you make now to help offset that student loan debt that you're dealing with right now? And when we started sort of deconstructing what people had experienced in financial education or what they thought financial education was, and reframed it in a way that was more about empowering, more about telling the full story of your personal financial life, most everyone in those focus groups said, well, yes, I would sign up for that. And so this is about redefining FinEd and what it means. It's not just the old adage of balance your checkbook. It's not just the rule of 72 and these things that we learned. It's a more comprehensive representation of what financial education should be. And how do we talk about these topics? How do you talk about decision making? How do you talk about prioritizing things in your life? And so I spent a little extra time on this to say to you that not only is it 88% of adults think FinEd should be required based on how they understand it, when we're actually more intentional about financial education being something where it's meeting people where they are and helping them be involved in the conversation about learning about this topic, that number goes up. And so NEFE's goal is to get this 88% to 100%. And we do that by being very thoughtful in how we consider and look at personal finance. There's one other slide that I want to share with you here to contextualize how we think at NEFE and why we think about the work the way we do before we start getting into sort of where we are right now as an industry and where we're going. There are three main components of what creates this personal finance ecosystem. And the reason NEFE created this framework is because it got so tiresome to have these constant discussions or constant debates about, does financial education work, yes or no? What can financial education do? And so what we have found is that a lot of people, well-meaning people, were sort of giving workshops, teaching some lessons on money that probably were fine quality, but using that one intervention or that one course or that one workshop or newsletter or whatever it was that was being counted as financial education. And largely that was probably a week or two carved out in a classroom. In putting 100% of the burden of someone's financial well-being on that one intervention and saying, it would be equal to saying, well, you took an exercise class, why are you overweight? You know, it's a weird sort of weighting of the burden on a certain kind of thing. And so what NEFE wanted to do is say, we need appropriate measures for the balance of influence that something can have in your life. And we started talking about it as a three-legged stool, meaning some people need a longer leg on one side than others. You know, some people want more freedom of choice and more sort of risk in their portfolio, and other people want more consumer protections. And it just depends on sort of the risk tolerance of individuals. But even more nuanced than that, breaking apart knowledge influencers. You know, it's one thing to get financial information, you know, and we all seek that out, right? When we are looking at tips, tricks, ways to save money, ways to sort of make maybe a rare but expensive decision like buying a car. all the way to becoming financially educated and financially literate, so that you become, to take the phrase from my sweet friend Anna Maria Lusardi, who I know gave this lecture a couple of years ago, to be the CFO of your life. And so we wanted to sort of make meaning of what power does knowledge, financial knowledge and access have in your life. And then there's also these other pieces that influence your financial well-being, like your behavior influences, unexpected events, social and material supports, meaning like things like financial aid to help someone help pay for college. And then there are foundational factors, you know, your family and culture, socioeconomics, demographics, general skills and competencies and values and beliefs. And this framework is imperative in when you're understanding how to strengthen the financial well-being of yourself, of those that you're teaching, those that you're advocating for, your neighbors and friends, and all of your constituents. Because it's beyond knowledge, it's beyond behavior, it's beyond foundational factors. It is all of these things that create this sense of financial well-being. And it's a continuum, if you will. Some people are going to need more knowledge influencers. Some people are going to need more mindset shift. Some people are going to need more foundational supports. I mean, let me give you an example. I grew up in Central Appalachia, not too far from where you are now. I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, and the third poorest congressional district in the United States. And there's a lot of economic obstacles in the community where I grew up. And, you know, if I were still living there, I could learn everything there is to know about personal finance. I could get my CFP, I could learn these topics. But if the economic system or the economic opportunities are limited, there's only so much I can do with that knowledge. And we wanted to create something that shows that knowledge is imperative and a cornerstone, but you have to have economic opportunity to apply those things. You have to have some semblance of how does your behavior influence those decisions? What structural policies are in place that allow for upward mobility on the economic ladder, if you will? And so this is a lot of jargon. It's a lot of sort of economic words and, you know, thinking about sort of all the pieces of that. But I do think it's important to understand that no single piece of this ecosystem solves the problem alone. Just like all the complex problems in our society, there's no single silver bullet, if you will, that gives us the only answer. It is about which levers work depending on your economic situation. And so we felt that this represents people who want certain kinds of choice in their life. It also represents people who have more economic obstacles to overcome in their life, whether they're a first-generation college student, whether they're a person who's historically had to face discrimination to get equal employment, whatever that is. We wanted this framework to represent that knowledge influence alone will not solve that problem, but knowledge influencers are imperative. And so with that, let's talk about where we are and where we're going. So I put a cheat sheet in the slides here. Now, these things are all on NEFE's website to sort of understand the differences of these sort of core elements of the ecosystem. So I wanted this to be on the chart here so you could see what that means. And we have, you know, video that explains it and so forth. But it's a great tool. Some colleges actually that teach personal finance now actually use this to frame the thinking about economic mobility and financial well-being. So NEFE, we're working on 3 pieces that we think are going to increase the effectiveness of financial education. We've all probably benefited from some level of being financially literate in our lives. We all want to have more of that. But for us, access, there are 3 pieces here that I'm going to cover today. Access is one of those fundamental pieces, meaning the ease in which all people can obtain financial education in a way that accommodates different life circumstances, as well as the way technology improves a person's ability to find education and information. You know, the obvious piece of this is K-12. You know, that's one of the giving access to every learner in Tennessee, for example, and you all have done that. Tennessee was one of the early leaders in this space in terms of policy, and we're grateful for that because you gave us a template so that other states can follow that. And Tennessee and Virginia and Utah in particular were early in on this, and the three of you have really given the rest of the states something to follow. We've got a lot of work to do in some of the other states, but so this access, and so the components of that, you know, you think about access in terms of who gets financial education. And so for us, we're looking at this and how do you have opportunity for these strategic collaborative approaches to advance the field through policy at both the state and federal levels. So we want to build on this momentum from the increase in high school graduation requirements. We're now at 25 states that are in some phase of implementing or have implemented a graduation requirement, a semester standalone sort of graduation requirement. There are a few other states that have FinEd embedded in other courses that require it. But what we know from the research is that a standalone is the way that you make the change. And then students in these well-resourced school districts are far more likely to receive personal finance instruction than students in other districts. And this is in the states where it's not required. And so when you have a state where there's no requirement, and you may have some teachers that are working at that local level who are lobbying their principal, or some parents that are working with some teachers to make sure the kids in that local community are getting a financial education. Typically what happens when it's not required is that the schools that have the most resources will teach it, and the schools that don't do not. And what we have found is that only about 3 to 4% of low-income schools, which are largely rural and or schools that predominantly serve students of color, are getting a financial education to graduate. And when you compare that to wealthier school districts or districts that have more resources coming in, you're getting that rate at about 5 times higher, maybe 6 times higher, depending on the district where that is happening. And so you're perpetuating inequities by not requiring this at a minimum standard that every kid, no matter their zip code, no matter their school, they're getting a quality financial education. And so most of this advocacy is currently sort of at the grassroots level, sort of at the school level or at the community level. There is an opportunity for this centralized voice and sort of grass top level advocacy in terms of this. We've got 25 states to go, quite frankly, that need to do this in order for the American public to benefit from a universal financial education. Ways that we're working on this, how NEFE is working to advance access to FinEd, is that we're looking at equity and access, who has access and who doesn't, bringing that to light to show that we're perpetuating inequities by not making it a minimum standard for every learner. It's a priority, a policy priority for us at the K-12 level that it's mandated as a graduation requirement. And that NEFE is really helping states that are looking at this from an implementation phase. This sense of elevating practices, connecting to policymakers, meaning people like at the State Department of Ed, or maybe people at the local level, like the Jumpstart Coalition members or the Councils for Economic Education, people who are doing this work on a day-to-day basis, helping connect educators and advocates to those folks who know how to do this well, so that we can guarantee every student in that state gets this. We're funding research, for example, that's looking at this. We're doing an in-depth look at Nevada's FinEd mandate for grades 3 to 12 to see what's working well, what's been tough, what's been weak, and what's successful, so that we can say to other states, these are the pain points, these are the things to consider. We're looking at a scale for individual financial access and creating that scale through the University, St. Louis University, so that people can know in communities what is the access to sort of financial success and access to quality sort of financial education, for example. And then a project that we funded at Knology is looking at, it found that greater spending on youth financial education for low and moderate income Americans actually translates to things like lower credit card debt, lower revolving debt. And so this can make significant change when you're working in communities where people are already limited economically, salaries are lower, maybe lack of education and training opportunities. And when you've got financial education happening at a quality level, you're lowering things like default rates, you're increasing credit scores, which then helps create more opportunity down the road. And that in time creates transferable wealth. We also have a partnership pilot with the Colorado Community College System, where we're looking at how do you create financial education opportunities for people who have limited time to focus and stop. You know, community college students, and in particular in Colorado, are largely working adults, Hispanic serving institutions, most of them. And how do we help learn about creating access points and on-ramps for financial education for non-traditional learners? You know, you can sit in the classroom and create that opportunity, but how do you create other opportunities where there's a centralized learning experience or some other way where people are already busy, have kids, have jobs, probably 2 jobs in some instances, and also worrying about things like student loan debt and so forth as they're getting training. And so we want to learn about that so that we can help others who are doing this kind of work. The second piece of this is quality. It's not just access to fin ed, it's access to quality fin ed. And so for us, this caliber of both the materials and the mechanisms that are used are important. And sometimes we, as a community, have counted it as a win when we solve the access problem. That's just step one. We want people to have access to something that's rigorous, that matters. We think the degree to which the educational interventions adjust for cultural, economic, racial, geographic differences, and then this sense of non-traditional education methods and patterns for sort of informing consumption. That's a mouthful to say. Can you relate to what's being said? Can you relate to those learning interventions? You know, I think about my own experience in learning fin ed. I was first generation college student myself. I had student loans. And I think about the times that I sat through when I was early at NEFE, and we were doing a national teacher training pilot on how do you build confidence with educators to cover this subject. And I was actually leading the research, and it was 700 educators across 5 states. And I sat through several workshops, you know, where we were building the confidence of educator as consumer. Then that translates into better instruction, so they know sort of the topic for themselves as a consumer, and then in the next step of that. And I often left those trainings sort of feeling shamed, really, because I had student loans and things like that. And we really needed to start rethinking how we talk about this topic to meet people where they are. Because there's a lot of finger pointing, there's a lot of screaming at people, there's a lot of, well, you're not good at math, and you know, you would have figured this out. Stop shaming people, engage people, help them think about this topic from a point of view of taking control, having agency, and relating to what's being covered. And so what's going to work maybe in one community may not work in the town where I grew up. And so let's think about financial education accounting for sort of cultural relevancy, meaning are the examples things that I can relate to? Is it something that I'm going to listen to, or am I just going to hold up the newspaper, which I literally saw happen in trainings where people just, you lost your audience, and make this something that people understand what you're saying, and the information can be timely. You know, you can act on that in that moment. And so, you know, as states are adding financial education, as our research understanding matures, there really is a need to create these standards of practice and dissemination of research that support consistency, quality, and continuous improvement. Customizing learning materials, there's no one size fits all. There are elements of the math that is one size fits all. But in terms of how you approach this topic, sometimes it's as simple as asking your students, what are they interested in? What topics are important? Are we talking about things like Bitcoin? Are we talking about these things that people are hearing about in a way that's relatable, in a way that is safe, in a protected environment to talk about these topics, so that they're not learning the hard way, because we are not brave enough to take on these topics in the classroom. The other issue that we're going to have to continue to address is this ongoing teacher shortage. There's a huge gap in subject matter expertise for teachers who are tasked with teaching personal finance in schools. We don't want to just add it on to someone who has had no personal finance training themselves. What we see sometimes is that if you're credentialed in something like social studies or math, and personal finance is under that umbrella, then you are, quote, qualified to teach the subject. And we think that's not doing a service to the teacher. It's not doing a service to the learner. And so creating these opportunities for teacher professional development, and not just K-12 teachers, any of you who are advocating for this topic at the local level, in your churches, in your libraries, in your community centers, at the college level, whatever that looks like, having opportunities to learn these topics yourself so that your confidence continues to build. Because this is the thing about personal finance. There are a few elements of it that are pretty static, but there are numerous elements of it that are not. There are always going to be organizations, corporations, and bad players even, who are spending a lot of money to take your money. And so staying in front of these topics and learning about this is important, and helping our teachers get the training they need. And that means you've got to fund teacher professional development. It means you've got to have quality materials written by subject matter experts so that the teachers and the educators and the volunteers themselves can be ready to address those timely topics. Ways that we're doing this is NEFE. Actually, we've defined what we think it takes to create effective financial education. This is on our website. We're in the process of revising this now to sort of update some of the language, but these 5 key factors for effective financial education. And most of these make sense to you, well-trained educator, relevant subjects, materials, vetted materials, timely learning interventions, and evaluating for impact. This is the one that trips a lot of people up. Seeing what impact you're having, whether that's a simple test of what people are learning and knowing, but it gives you information. It tells you where people are weak after they've had experience in financial education, the topics that they're relating to and where they're not. So it gives you an opportunity to say, well, people are still struggling with managing risk. People are still struggling with insurance topics. Let's rethink how we're covering this topic. And it gives you an opportunity to do the best job you can do in terms of advocating for quality, and also learning that for yourself. We've been bringing in visiting scholars to sort of give understanding of the nuance and how we understand financial well-being. Our last 2 scholars have focused on things like financial trauma. We bring things into the room with us when we're learning this topic, and how does something like financial trauma in particular color the way you see everything in terms of personal finance, and in particular, financial trauma among Black women. Our current visiting scholar is a Native American, and she is doing lots of storytelling with different Native communities on what does economic thriving look like in Native communities. What is the history of financial education within Native communities, and how should we learn from those communities, instead of thinking we're going to come in with our curated examples. Let's ask communities what works for them, and let's work with them in that term. We have a strategic partnership with the Appalachian College Association, which Their schools are largely low-income rural students who are first in their families to go to college. We're testing different ideas of what does it mean to engage in financial education programming on a college campus within that context. What we think we're learning, what may work in one community of, wealthier schools or larger cities may not work when people are the first in their family to go to college and they're navigating the cultural nuances of college as it is. What does it mean to create thoughtful financial education programming with different kinds of students? And so that we're not making assumptions about what will and what won't work. We want to find out. We want to ask those students everything from what causes them to show up, what causes them to engage, what do they relate to, and what do they hold on to. We also have several research projects that are getting at quality. One of these things that's important to me is looking at how do you create financial literacy standards. Are there assumptions that we're making of what works well for everyone, or what's relatable, or what topics are appropriately delivered within what context? If we find out, hey, we're doing it great, then good, we've got data for that. If we find out we're missing the mark on some things, then we know we can do better. Our goal is ultimately to always sort of raise that bar. We actually have one of your sister institutions, a research grant that's looking at increasing the effectiveness of high school personal finance courses in Tennessee, and in particular in lower income schools, and what does it take to support teacher training, material development, teacher supports in schools that have economic challenges, and how do we help support teachers, and what does that look like? And that research project has been going on for well over a year now, so we should have some findings from that project in several months, so that we can say, in our advocacy efforts across the country, teachers in low-income schools have different needs, and this is what they are, and so that we can make sure FinEd is working at a quality level, and no matter the zip code. And so the last piece here is this idea about impact. We want to make sure that unique circumstances and needs are qualified, that are clear, that we want to make sure the data show in terms of where there's success and where there are gaps. I was talking about that evaluation loop a minute ago. And then the quality of assessments that we're actually using. There are a lot of assessments out there that measure financial literacy. One of the things that NEFE is doing right now is we're testing a lot of these measures to see how have they accounted for cultural differences. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. And I use myself as an example, usually just because it's easier and I'm not making generalizations. I'm using myself as a study of one. But when you look back at educational research and that tested IQs, a lot of you probably remember these when you were in elementary school. If you're a Gen Xer like me, you may remember these, like, you look at a picture and, elephant goes to, and then what's the example? Well, the classic example I like to give, and I got this example from a dear friend, Julie Heath, who was a professor at the University of Memphis for many years, and is retired since from a university in Ohio. But the IQ test looked at, you would have a teacup and a saucer, and that was the right answer to measure IQ. Teacup goes to saucer. Well, let me tell you, where I grew up, there were no teacups and saucers. There was no match for that. And so for me, if I were taking that test, little 6-7-year-old Billy taking that test, I would have thought teacup went to table, or teacup went to coffee, because I didn't know, we didn't have tea. That was a fancy thing. And we had coffee. I would have known, I would have picked something that made sense to my brain and made sense to my experience. And so I would have been marked wrong. I would have missed a lot of those, and I would have been considered that I did not have a high IQ. What we want to make sure is that the measures of financial literacy are not doing the same thing to people, that we're not making assumptions about what people can and cannot relate to. So we're testing measures of financial literacy to make sure they are actually calibrated for cultural experience, cultural relevance. And what we're finding is that some of them do, some of them are actually pretty good, some of them aren't. And you'll see a special issue coming out in the next, I actually don't know when that's going to be published, but probably within the next year or so, of a journal. That's the entire issue is on measures of financial literacy, how some of them, how to improve them to make sure that we are truly measuring financial literacy when we have accounted for people's cultural experience and their background and their relevance, so that we're not missing out on those little billies of the world who would be considered not smart or not having a high IQ. We want to make sure that financial literacy is truly measuring what it says it is. And so, you know, we jokingly at NEFE say that's the unsexy work of financial education, because it's hard to find funders to fund things like that. So we're doing what we call the basics. I jokingly say that if I were a basketball coach, I would be the fundamentals coach. I would be the free throw guy. I'd be on that. You'd be working those free throws constantly. And so NEFE is looking at these fundamental elements of like this, making sure that we're not making assumptions about how we measure financial literacy, how we measure the effects of financial education, so that we're not in a place that where we're saying someone down the road 5 or 6 years from now, after all these states are now requiring FinEd, and we're using the wrong tools to measure financial literacy. We're not having to make up and say, well, you know, the naysayers are saying, well, see, look, it doesn't work. There's no measurement. Measurement isn't capturing the change. And so we're trying to account for that now, so that we are doing the best work we can do and we're measuring it appropriately. And so that we know where the impact is strong and where it's weak, and where it's weak, how do we get better? So ways to improve these, you know, proper evaluation of interventions, rigorous foundational research, as I was saying, core components of what it means to have effective financial education, that we're increasing capacity, but we're making sure that the financial education specific projects, you know, they're fairly small. There might just be one teacher in an entire school district who's covering this topic. And what happens if that person's out sick? What happens if the state doesn't have dollars to pay for teacher training as we're bringing in new teachers? You know, we're trying to account for that now. There's a lot of cost barriers to sort of widespread adoption of evaluation activities. Folks, evaluation is expensive if you do it well. You know, it takes time. You got to pay researchers. You got to pay for the incentives to participate. But if you don't do it, how do you know you're making an impact? And so NEFE is working to try to look at all the ways we can as a foundation, all the ways we can as an advocacy organization, sort of raise that bar. And then understanding the return on the investment. We're actually looking at some projects right now to try to get some return on investment. What does it mean for the life of the individual? What does it mean for a community to have invested thoughtfully in financial education? And then we got to compete. There's a lot more dollars spent on people trying to take your money than people are trying to help you learn about managing your money. So how do you compete with that sort of commercial sector, mass media? And let me tell you, there's a lot of people on TikTok. There's a lot of people on social media who are giving financial advice that think because they spend money, they're an expert. And, you know, what may work for one person and it's relatable might be an interesting on-ramp, and I'm not belittling that. But we need quality, we need standards, and we need to make sure that every person is getting the same minimum standard by the time they launch into their financial life, so that they're not distracted by noise. And that's what I call it, noise. The work we're doing here, you know, we're heading up on nearly $7 million we've invested in research in this topic. You know, but every dollar we spend, our budget this year is $10.4 million. Every dollar of that is going toward some version of being a champion of effective FinEd, whether that's advocacy work, research, data, me on the road talking to anybody who will listen to me about the quality and why we need this work and the outcomes of that. And I didn't spend a lot of time in my remarks talking about the benefits of FinEd and the measurable outcomes, because I know you've covered that in the past. But what I wanted to show is that there are people who are working on increasing the quality of what we know and how we do that. So we're looking at developing new measures to capture these aspects of personal finance ecosystem. We're looking at the don't knows. You know, there's a lot of surveys that say don't know, refuse to answer. We're trying to look at what does that actually mean? Is there an opportunity there? And again, it's the unsexy work of FinEd. but it's necessary work. And then validating these existing scales. One of the things that we're doing that's so wonderful, and I enjoy hearing these, is collecting stories of impact. We're trying to give a qualitative context to the story of our story banking initiative. We have dozens and dozens of these, and we're going to continue to collect these stories of the benefit and the power of financial education on these individual lives and what that has meant to people, so that you can use those stories to go make the case locally. If you're needing dollars to support your work, if you're needing ideas about how to frame your advocacy work to make the case for financial education, whatever that audience is that you're advocating for. We're also doing a lot of opinion polling and consumer confidence, access to FinEd, discrimination and trust issues with financial services, which we know is a barrier to people taking control of their financial life. If they've had bad experiences, they're just going to hold it at arm's length and not engage. Looking at student loans, we did, the student loan repayment pause ending. That got a lot of interest, in this idea of learning about it. But what we know is that financial education increases if you're in a state where it's required. Your credit score is over 30 points higher within a few years of graduating than a state where it isn't required. Your credit is lower. You borrow less to go to college. You borrow better to go to college. You have lower credit card debt when you graduate. There are numerous quantifiable benefits to financial education. Our goal at NEFE is to continue to increase the quality of what's happening, who has access to it, and what impact that is having throughout their life. And we will continue to do that work. And we pride ourselves on trying to be what our field and where our community needs and what they need next. And that's how we've always operated, and that's how we're going to continue to operate. So in 5 years, we may be doing something that we've not even thought about at this moment, because that's what you as advocates, that's what you as financial educators need in the field. So here are the calls to action. Policymakers and government institutions, this topic is nonpartisan. What we have seen in almost every single state, except for one, this was a cross-the-board vote. Almost every single Democrat, almost every single Republican in both the House and Senate sides of state legislatures have supported this work. There's a lot of opportunity to consider these city-focused or regionally focused programs, to pair with financial education, consult teachers on what they need, do thoughtful implementation. There's no sort of turnkey here. You need to really think about what's going to resonate with your learners. Include this evaluation component. If there's no dollars for it, try to advocate for dollars for evaluation, because you have to be able to tell the story. Are you making a difference or not? Because then that brings broader change down the road. And then, the true cost and returns to implement these statewide requirements. There's more calls to action for research professionals, more large-scale data, national experimentation, building these stronger pipelines for dissemination of research. Most researchers are not incentivized to talk about their findings outside of just a peer-reviewed research journal. And those journals do not do a great job of advocating that up into the general consumer discourse, and meaning, public media, TV, magazines, and so forth, getting that out so that the public demands and expects this topic. And then more foundations. There's so few of us who fund in this space. We need more foundations, more grant makers to fund in this space, because it is an essential component of economic mobility. You have to have financial knowledge in order to navigate our complicated financial systems. And so, financial education is improving. Access to financial education is improving. Impact is improving because we've been clearer about how to measure things and what quality looks like. But there's a lot more work to be done. And there's a lot more people who need FinEd that are not sitting in a classroom. And in our stance at NEFE is that in order for financial education to work, it has to work for everyone. And so I know there may be a few questions. I'm not sure how best to facilitate that, but I will leave that to my friends at the university if there are time for questions.
Well, Dr. Hensley, thank you so very much for your very thought-provoking comments. We are actually all out of time, so we will not have time for questions today, but I will share your slides with our audience and direct them to NEFE. There's a lot of material for us as teachers and students to be dwelling on, and the call to action is clear. So thank you very much. Thank you all for attending the 2024 Financial Literacy Lecture, and we'll see you again next year. Thank you.